Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 12 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I discuss your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the deadline. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So as always, let's start with those press conference updates as of Friday afternoon at 3 PM. And apologies for the small text. I suppose I could have split it across, I was going to say multiple slides. This isn't a lecture, but there are just so many press conference updates. This isn't even everything, but I've hopefully just covered those key ones from an FPL perspective. So let's start with Arsenal. Let's start with SAKA. We knew that we wouldn't get a very good update on SAKA, and sadly we haven't. Some people are taking this really negatively, this update from Arteta. And if Arteta was a really honest manager, you would look at this and say it doesn't sound great. So what he essentially said for both Declan Rice and Bukayo Saka is that they took part in partial training for the first time this morning for Arsenal. So this would suggest that they haven't trained throughout the international break. And let's focus on Saka from an FPL perspective. Saka's not trained throughout the international break, and his first training session is Friday, and it's only partial training. If that is genuinely true, then that is not good. However, we just don't know. It might have been that they planned to give him all of the time off and they planned for his first session to be Friday. They may have never planned for him to train any earlier than that and to just give him that full rest. It could also be that he's just outright lying. So we just never know with Arteta. It kind of feels like the obvious: don't buy, don't sell, don't captain, don't bench. Start him if you have him. Definitely don't give him the armband, because the fixture isn't really there for captaincy anyway, and we'll discuss captaincy later. And I probably wouldn't go out there and buy him now. I mean, you've got Bruno Fernandes at a cheaper price you can go and buy instead for a couple of weeks, and then look to bring in Saka in a few weeks instead, because Saka's best fixtures don't really start until game week 16 anyway. The next four for Arsenal aren't terrible. In fact, they're okay, but they're not necessarily targetable fixtures. So for me, it just depends. I'd just stick with whatever you've already got with Saka at the moment. If you've literally got no bench, then that is a bit of an issue, of course. But maybe then I would focus your transfer on making sure that you've got a decent first sub. Calafiori is available, which is good news for Arsenal. If you want to take a punt, you could. I just probably wouldn't go there outside of Gabriel, Saliba and Raya. And White will be out for a number of months. It sounds like various issues and injuries that he's got, so he could be out for a while. So yeah, Timber could offer really nice value. But again, considering how expensive he is, I think I'd rather just go for Raya or Gabriel. I mean, if you really can't stretch, I'd maybe just go for Kanate instead if we're looking at defenders around that same price. Tomiyasu's obviously not quite fit either, but he is a lot closer. On Spurs, Van de Ven and Romero are both out for Spurs. So their backline is likely to be Dragishin and also Ben Davis. Now, they are both capable defenders. Some might disagree with that, but they are capable. I'm not saying that this means that City will go and win 7 or 8-0, but this is great news if you own Erling Haaland and you're planning on keeping him. And I genuinely already thought that Haaland was a really good captaincy shout. Again, we're going to discuss captaincy probably in the next section, actually. I think this makes Haaland even more tempting. But if you've got Haaland and no Salah and you were really liking the idea of maybe keeping Haaland for one more week, it's not the worst idea. But as we'll discuss in a second, Southampton are also without some key players. So it's kind of really good for both Salah and Haaland. So if you're sat there like me, and I'm very happy I am, with both Haaland and Salah, this is looking really good. And of course, Bentancur will now begin his 7-match ban as well. And they are domestic games, so he doesn't serve those in the European competition. For Man City, there are a few interesting updates. So Kovacic is out for 3 to 4 weeks. And why that is interesting is because it could mean that Rico Lewis plays in midfield. Because Man City now have Stones and Akanji back in team training, so you'd expect that they're back fit and available, and Ake is very close to being back. I think for games such as Spurs, Man City's favoured back four will be Gvardiol at left back, let's say Stones and Akanji as the centre-backs, and Walker at right-back. The reason I think Walker will be favoured is because he's up against Heung-min Son, and as much as we criticise Kyle Walker on a weekly basis, Pep clearly trusts him defensively to do a job out there more than Rico Lewis, and I think that's fair enough. So the only way I see Rico Lewis starting is if the centre-backs aren't fit enough to start, Kyle Walker isn't trusted, or Lewis plays in midfield. With Kovacic being out, the likelihood of Lewis starting midfield does increase. But I will just note, if they play that back four of Gvardiol, Akanji, Stones and Walker, with let's say Gundogan as one of the defensive midfielders or sixes, we have seen before that Akanji can step up from centre-back and play alongside whoever else plays in that defensive role. We've also seen Bernardo Silva can play there, O'Reilly, Nunes. They have other players. So even if they had loads of injuries, it doesn't necessarily mean Rico Lewis starts. And also, when you put together that City haven't been very good defensively, Spurs are a very good attack. And he hasn't actually shown much attacking threat. And if he is playing in a pivot alongside Gundogan, he's not going to get forward that much anyway. It still doesn't make Rico Lewis great. But I guess this increases his chances of starting by like 20 to 30%, I would say. But it's definitely not guaranteed. Also, Foden and Grealish were both pictured in team training as well. City is starting to get their key players back, I reckon. And also, by the way, Pep Guardiola signing a 2-year contract extension, I think it was, or at least another year. That's massive for Man City. It just relieves that stress, the anxiety at the club, the worry. The players obviously thinking about their future as well. The fact that Pep has committed, I think that will be massive for them. I really expect City to go on quite a good run now, even with the fixtures not being great. On Liverpool, the really bad news or negative news is that Trent looks very unlikely to feature. So Trent is still not trained with the team. The quote was that they expect him to be back soon. So I don't think he was officially fully ruled out, but it sounds like he's ruled out for game week 12. Virgil van Dijk, apparently there were a few rumours going around that he might not be okay. Apparently Slot said he is absolutely all good. So Van Dijk's fine. And Alisson and Jota do remain out. So if you've got Kelleher, you will need to sell him eventually, but you are going to get the Southampton game, which is absolutely really good news. And if you've got someone like a Darwin or a Gakpo, Jota being out still obviously makes them much more likely to start. So Liverpool dealing with a couple of injuries still, but you'd still expect them to comfortably, famous last words, comfortably beat Southampton. On Chelsea, there was no mention of specific Chelsea players with Maresca's press conference, but Fofana, Colwill, Gusto, Palmer and Sancho have all been pictured in team training. And obviously, very specifically, Colwill and Palmer are the two that people are focused on. There have been various pictures of them in team training all week. So you would expect that Colwill and Palmer will be absolutely fine, and we've not heard anything otherwise. So you can largely ignore the flags on those at the moment. On Newcastle, Wilson and Trippier are both going to be assessed ahead of their game on Monday evening. Trippier apparently is slightly closer than Callum Wilson in terms of a return. So it might be that Wilson's not even in the squad once again. And the thing is, even once Wilson's back in the squad, he's not starting ahead of Isak anytime soon. And that's if he can stay fit. I just think even if Wilson was to eventually get a start, I just think they slap Isak on the left or they play two up top. So I really wouldn't worry about Isak's minutes coming up. And this is obviously good news for them that they're starting to get some of their players back. Newcastle are a team similar to Man City that I could just see going on a really nice run now. So yeah, looking very good for Newcastle. On Everton, McNeil has had a good week of training. So if you've still got Dwight McNeil and you wanted to play him, there is a good chance that he features. I would imagine that he does. And Deitch is also hopeful that Branthwaite could play after training with the team. So Everton, again, starting to get some of their key players back. There are now just a few other injury updates to run through, so let's rattle through them. On Brentford, Mbermo, Wissa and Pinnock are all fit for Game Week 12, so if you own any of the three, you are looking very good. Eze has trained this week, but has been ruled out for Game Week 12. So there were some conflicting quotes, because he's been in training all week, but apparently he's not going to be available for the game against Aston Villa. So if you own any Aston Villa defenders, that is great news. However, if you own Ezri Konsa, he has been ruled out himself. So Emery did confirm that Villa will be without Konsa, Ramsey, Onana and Kamara for Game Week 12. That then does make them a bit weaker defensively, that they were without their best defender in Konsa and Onana and Kamara. But I do still really like the likes of Luka Dean, who I'll discuss in a second as well. On Bournemouth, Semenyo and Kirkes, that's a typo, have been past fit for Game Week 12. So if you own Semenyo and you've seen that flag and you're worried, no need to be worried. He should be available. Even though he wasn't pictured in team training earlier in the week, he has been past fit for Game Week 12. On Ipswich, Greaves has returned to training. So if you've got the 4 million Greaves in your team and you've been wanting him to return for a bit of squad depth, it looks like he will be available, if not this week, very, very soon. But he's definitely back in team training. I have put here that Hurst has apparently out for weeks and weeks. Not many people will own Hurst, but you might own Delap or be looking at Delap, and the only real massive rotation risk for Delap would be Hurst, and he's been playing very well. So Delap's minutes have definitely shot up as a result of that. And then finally was what I mentioned earlier, Southampton will be without Ramsdale and Bednarek for Game Week 12. And the reason that is key is obviously Salah plays against Southampton this week. So they're without their starting goalkeeper and their starting defender. So both Spurs and Southampton are really struggling with injuries and defence. So yeah, it feels like it could be a swingy week, but both Salah and Haaland as a result are really nice captaincy options. So having gone through all of those press conference updates, or most of them at least, and having also just started to allude towards captaincy, let's now take a look at captaincy and who I think is the best player to place the armband on this week. So guys, let's discuss captaincy, and I've got 5 options on the list this week. I have tried to narrow it down a little bit more because I think for most people they're choosing between Salah, Haaland, Palmer, but I do have 2 decent sort of more differential options in Isak and Fernandes here, who for me would be the 4th and 5th best captaincy shouts this week. In terms of the table, it's pretty much the same as usual. I've just brought back the positional matchup. So we've got non-penalty expected goals per 90 this season for each of the players, non-penalty expected assists per 90, the opponent XGC rank. So as always, 20th would mean they're the worst defense in the league for defensive data. First would mean they're the best. So it gives us an idea about how good their matchup is. The bookies percentage goal. So this is the percentage chance, according to the bookies, that they score 1 goal, not taken into account assist threat. And then that end column is the positional matchup. So if it's got a tick, it means that the defense that they're playing against concede most of their chances where the player that we have as a captaincy option operates. So for Haaland, he's got a tick because Spurs concede most of their chances through the centre of the pitch. So as you can see, for 4 of the 5 options, it's actually a perfect positional matchup, which we don't always get. The only one that is not is Fernandes. I will just say, where Ipswich concede most of their chances is through the left-back role, where Leif Davis operates, because he often gets forward quite a lot. So if Fernandes plays on the right of that front 3, which is kind of probable, possible, and he does hold width a little bit, he might actually be operating, again, in a position that is good for him. It's difficult to say with certainty. If we're assuming that he operates mainly in the centre of the pitch, that is not where Ipswich concede most of their chances. So yeah, that's the table. In terms of those 2 more rogue options outside of Salah, Haaland, Palmer, with Fernandes, he's always a good shout because of how talismanic he is. It's going to be Amorim's first game, the Portuguese contingency. He's on set pieces, penalties. We do think he's going to play in the front 3 rather than in that central 2, which means that he's basically playing in behind the striker in an advanced number 10 role. The other thing that is interesting about that role is not only is he playing, so they're basically, it's like a front 3, but the 2 wingers come inside and they're almost playing as 10s. So it's like a dual 10, but he might maintain a little bit of width at points. But normally the width is held by the wing backs. Not only does that mean that he's very high up the pitch, but it also means that there are going to be so many players behind him that he won't have to exert as much energy tracking back and doing the defensive work, because he's going to have that 4-man midfield essentially and the 3 centre-backs behind him. So I think Fernandes will be operating in a more advanced position than we've seen, which just, it screams attacking returns for him. Ipswich are the worst defence in the league this season for expected goals conceded. I just think that, I mean, you could see this as a positive, but Amorim's first game, we still don't know exactly how United will line up. They've not had, in fact, they're probably going to have like 1 or 2 full training sessions with all of the players available. Like, is that enough to say comfortably then that Fernandes is a good captaincy shout? I feel like you need a leap of faith at that point, and there's just not quite enough. Considering some of the other fixtures that players have, like Salah against Southampton and Haaland against Spurs at home, I just feel like if the other popular captaincy options had slightly rougher fixtures, let's say like Salah had Villa and Haaland had Bournemouth or something like that, and it was that kind of week, then yeah. But in a week like this, I just think owning Fernandes will be lovely enough for you. If he goes and gets another 15 to 17 points, you're happy anyway. On Isak, I actually think Isak is a seriously viable captaincy shout because of the matchup. West Ham concedes so many chances in transition, firstly. Isak is exceptional in transition, and so are Newcastle. But they also concede a lot of chances through the centre of the pitch. We saw Jackson, the joy that he had against West Ham earlier in the season. So I look at Isak and I think, talisman, on penalties, great data, terrible defence. The second joint with Salah, second greatest chance of scoring a goal in Game Week 12, according to the bookies, with the perfect matchup for him, gaining the minutes back, getting the fitness back. Wilson's still unavailable. Monday night under the lights. Everything points towards this being a pretty good game for Isak. So if you're going to go rogue, I think Isak is my 4th favourite captaincy option. Which then leaves Salah, Haaland and Palmer, who for me are the top 3 captaincy options, as boring as that is. In terms of bookies, it's Haaland always is the most likely to score. But as I always say, there's only 6% separating Salah and Haaland. And this is for 1 goal. Salah also has an extra point for a goal, an extra point for a clean sheet, and much greater assist threat. Once you take into account all of that, if we were to transition these bookies' odds into expected FPL points for the week or projected points, Salah would be projected to get greater points, which is what Fantasy Football Hub have as well. Most sites will predict that Salah will get more points in Game Week 12, but I don't think there's that much in it. Also, these odds were taken before the definitive news that Romero was going to be out, so maybe it boosts Haaland slightly there. And I just think that everything's kind of coming back together for Man City. They're getting the players back fit. De Bruyne, we expect, could start this game. Haaland scoring goals during the international break. He's been getting the chances as well. They're getting a lot of their defenders back fit. Pep Guardiola's just signed a contract extension. I just feel like it all could be coming together in a week where they've got no Bentancur, Romero or Van de Ven. I think it's much closer than it was before we got all of that news. And I actually think that Erling Haaland is a seriously good captaincy shout. But the thing is, Salah has had a full rest over the international break. He's playing against the second worst defence in the league. He is an absolute bonus points machine. He's got the second greatest chance of scoring a goal. It is also a really good positional matchup for Salah, where Southampton concede most of their chances down their left flank and through the centre. And they're without Ramsdale and Bednarek. So all of the reasons that I gave for Haaland, the Salah is just like, yeah, and I've also got good reasons to captain me as well. So I honestly think, as I will discuss Palmer in a second, but I think Salah and Haaland are now, for me, are the two standout options. And I think they've separated themselves from Palmer. What don't I like about Palmer? The thing that I do like is he's so explosive, right? His ceiling is so much higher than, I would say, anyone on this list. Anyone in the Premier League. Palmer's ceiling is just a joke. He can get 4 goals in a game, which not many players can. Even Erling Haaland, like 4 goals is a lot of goals. Haaland can, but he's also a forward. So he gets less points for 4 goals than a Palmer would, right? Immediately just through the goals, that's 4 less points. If he gets the clean sheet, that's 5. So, yeah, I just think Palmer's ceiling is absolutely massive, and he's shown that. He's also, again, playing against a terrible defence. They're 18th for expected goals conceded, Leicester. So Leicester, Southampton, Ipswich are the 3 worst defences in the league. He's got really good assist threat, decent goal threat as well. The only thing that I don't like is that it's 12:30 on Saturday. And I just see, it might be a bit of narrative bias. I've got no data to back this up, but the first game back after an international break, it always worries me. Like, it's very early. Salah plays on the Sunday. I don't know. I just feel like that extra day, and also just from a psychological perspective, like if you have a captaincy blank or Palmer goes and gets like a single assist, it's a long weekend, isn't it, at that stage? So, yeah, maybe I'm just building a narrative in my head to go with a safer captaincy option. But for me right now, I've actually, not in particular, not for a particular reason, not on purpose, but I've actually got them in order of how I would captain them. So I think Salah, Haaland, Palmer, Isak, Fernandes is how I would order the captaincy options this week. But I don't think there's much between Salah and Haaland. So if you want to go brave once again, or you don't have Salah, and you were thinking, do you know what, I just wanted one more week where I can maybe decide next week if I do want to make the pivot, I don't think there's much between them right now. Like, Haaland's data is a joke. KDB being back, like I said, the injuries to the Spurs defence, I really don't mind it as a shout. I very luckily own Salah, Haaland and Palmer, so I've got a 3-way choice. I've narrowed it down to Salah or Haaland, and at the moment I'm going for Salah, just because I don't want to overthink this one. And maybe I'm just going for safety in numbers. Like, Salah's the most popular captain. He'll be the highest owned player. So many people have now sold Haaland that I think he'll still gain me rank even without the captaincy, which is a nice position to be in. So it's a little bit of a boring move for me, especially when I'm ranked at 1 million. I could take a risk here, but I also don't want to damage my season any further. And I'm just like, if I think it's really close, maybe. And someone actually sent me a message, which was a really, really good way of looking at it. If you were to tell me that one of Spurs or Southampton turn up and give the other team a really tough game, you were to tell me that Southampton go out there and give Liverpool a really tough game and Liverpool really struggle, or Spurs come out the blocks and give City a really tough game, I would predict that the more likely outcome would be that Spurs could give City a tough game. I don't think it will happen, but I think it's more likely than Southampton keeping Liverpool at bay. So I just think in terms of predictability, it feels very predictable that it will be a Liverpool 2 or 3-0 win, and therefore Salah feels like the safer captaincy option. So it depends on your risk appetite, depends on your rank, depends on who you own. But for me, yeah, Salah, Haaland, Palmer, and if you're looking a little bit more rogue, I really like Alexander Isak. So I did get a lot of questions around both Jackson versus Isak and then Semenyo versus Rodgers. Those were the couple of comparisons that people wanted me to do. So those will be the next 2 sections, is just comparing those 2 sets of players. On Jackson versus Isak, listen, they are both fantastic options. If you only have the money for Jackson, go out there and get him. I think he is fantastic. I do have some reservations, as I'll discuss in a second. And Alexander Isak, for me, is just absolutely brilliant. At 8.5, he's still good value. Remember at the start of the season when everyone had him in their team, there was a reason for that, right? And the fixtures are really starting to improve now for Newcastle too. So, I actually do prefer Isak by some distance, believe it or not. But that isn't because Jackson's a bad choice. And it's also not down to non-penalty expected goal involvement, which you guys will be very happy by. So it's actually some of the surrounding stuff. In terms of the fixtures, I actually think they're very comparable. I would maybe just about lean towards Jackson's overall across the next 5. but there's not much in it. What do I like about Jackson when it plays Leicester, Southampton and Brentford? But also there are 3 away games and 2 home games, whereas Isak's got 3 home games and 2 away. And the home games include West Ham at home and Leicester at home. And that Brentford away game shouldn't be a grey fixture. I only did that because that's what the FPL site have, but that's a green fixture. Brentford at the G-Tech go absolutely ballistic and they concede so many chances. I really like the set of games for both of them. So I don't have an issue fixtures-wise with either. So what is my reasoning for Isak over Jackson? It's 2 or 3 things. The first thing would be penalties is a massive advantage. And I know there haven't been many penalties this season. And sometimes I can get a little bit caught up on penalties about how important they are, right? You're probably unlikely to get more than 1 penalty over the next 6 to 8. But that is an extra goal because you expect Isak to take it and to convert it. So that's an extra... Let's say that based on the odds, we would expect 1 penalty. So that's an extra goal that you've just got there, based if they do get that penalty. And they could get more. We've seen spells. Do you remember when in Birmingham got like 3 penalties in 5 weeks? I'm not saying that will be the case, but we do see that often, especially when they've got some tricky players like Harvey Barnes and Gordon that can win penalties. So yeah, I really, really like that element. But it's more so Jackson. So Jackson is on, firstly, 4 yellow cards. And I don't want to drive home that point too much because I feel like we can, again, get quite caught up on the fact that players on 4 yellows, don't bring him in. And Jackson could score 4 goals in the next 3 weeks and not get booked. And it could be like, well, yeah, he might get booked soon, but he's already got so many goals. So bookings aren't everything, but he gets 1 more booking and he's suspended for a game. Also, game week 14 is a midweek deadline. That is the Southampton away game. I think that based on the strategy that Maresca has deployed with having a basically completely different team midweek, I don't think he'll do that for the Southampton game, but I think we will see rotation. And I think one of those players that will be rotated is Jackson. I think there is a very good chance that Nkunku starts that Southampton game. So I said, actually, in my video earlier today, that what you could see with Jackson, which would be a worst case scenario, is he plays Leicester and Villa, gets benched for Nkunku against Southampton, starts the Spurs game, and then gets booked against Spurs, which means he misses the Brentford game. So this is a worst case scenario, but you could see a situation where he plays Leicester Villa, benched for Southampton, plays Spurs, suspended for Brentford. In which case his games are Leicester Villa Spurs in the next 5, where Isak would have West Ham, Palace, Liverpool, Brentford, and Leicester. That is a worst case scenario, but you have to almost plan for that in some situations. So if I think that Isak is better because he's on penalties, his minutes are probably slightly more secure, and he doesn't have a yellow card risk, or for me, a risk of being benched, because I just don't see Wilson starting instead of him, then I think that just leans me back towards Isak. In terms of the data, it's actually slightly in favour of Jackson in terms of goal threat. So Jackson's goal threat this season has been really good. 0.59 expected goals, 0.49 expected goals for Isak, but then Isak just carries a little bit more creativity. In terms of big chance involvement, they're both getting well over 1 big chance involvement per 90. They're basically both brilliant options. And I know I've just said some bad stuff about Isak there. Sorry, about Jackson. I still think he's fine to bring in. But for me, those 2 things would be enough to put me off. The yellow card risk and the risk of being benched in the midweek fixtures. And going into the busy Christmas period, and Nkunku is such a fantastic option for them to bring off the bench or to start instead. I just don't think Newcastle have that same option because Wilson can't stay fit. And even if he is fit, I think Isak is just streets ahead for me. So yeah, if you have the money, I would go Isak. If you've already got Jackson, keep him. And if you do just want to take a punt on him, lots of people will be put off for the reasons that I just gave. And could I still see him starting Southampton? Absolutely. Or it might be that he gets booked against Villa, which means he misses the Southampton game anyway, which then means that you have the predictable benching that you would have expected regardless. So I'll leave it there, but definitely Alexander Isak I like a lot. So another comparison, as I said, that a lot of people were asking for is Rodgers versus Semenyo. I'd assume a lot of people are on Wildcard, deciding between one or the other, or you're looking to sell one of the two. Maybe you've got both of them and you're looking to bring a Salah or a Palmer in and selling Haaland or something like that, and you want to know who to keep. I don't think you can go wrong keeping, buying, or selling either of them. They're both fantastic, and I don't think there's a lot between them in terms of the data, the fixtures. I think they are very comparable assets, even if they play very different roles for their teams. But there are pros and cons for both of them. In terms of the fixtures, people have been talking a lot about Bournemouth's fixtures and not a lot about Aston Villa's. And I actually think I marginally prefer Aston Villa's over the next 4 or 5, but they're both very good. So for Aston Villa, what I like, 3 out of the next 5 are at home, and those home fixtures are Palace, Brentford, and Southampton. The away games aren't easy against Chelsea and Nottingham Forest, but I just really like those next 3 home games. And for Semenyo, there's a really nice bunch of fixtures. Brighton, Wolves, Spurs, Ipswich, West Ham. Brighton and Spurs aren't terrible defences, but Wolves, Ipswich, and West Ham are conceding goals for fun. The thing that I like slightly less is that the 2 best games there are arguably Wolves and Ipswich, and they're both away. So I would actually say marginally, I prefer the fixtures for Rodgers, but they're great for both. What I do like for Semenyo is that the minutes will consistently be better. Rodgers is getting a lot more early subs in recent weeks, and his fitness isn't quite holding up as it was at the start of the season. But they do have a few injuries. We spoke about the injuries to Onana, the injuries to Kamara, to Ramsey, and I think that Rodgers will continue to start. I don't know if he'll start every single game, but I definitely think the starts are still there. It's just whether he gets that sub between like 60 and 70 minutes. Semenyo tends to play 90 minutes most weeks. So yeah, Semenyo is definitely the more nailed asset. And going into the busy Christmas period, I like that a lot. But do remember that Semenyo is also on 4 yellow cards. So he's more nailed. But in terms of if you were to ask me who's more likely over the next 4 games to miss a game, it's Semenyo because of the yellow card situation. But obviously, as soon as he gets that suspension, well, then it's done. I mean, in an ideal world, he probably gets booked against Wolves for you, and then he misses the Spurs game, and then you've got him from 15 and beyond. But you just never know. If he gets booked against Spurs, then he misses the Ipswich game, then that's a lot harder to take. So you have to look at your own risk appetite and tolerance and make a decision there. If we look at the rest of the data, it's honestly super close. Semenyo does have greater goal threat, 0.33 non-penalty expected goals versus Rodgers 0.26. And then they've got exactly the same expected assist at 0.15. I know Semenyo has greater expected goals, but this is because of the sheer amount of shots that the man takes. He has the second highest number of shots in the Premier League this season. Only Erling Haaland has more. So yes, his expected goals is very high, but as you can see by the big chance involvement, Rodgers is actually involved in a greater amount of big chances per 90 at 1.1 to Semenyo's 0.84. Semenyo's actually not getting that many clear-cut chances. He's getting more small chances and shooting a hell of a lot. He's actually only had, I think, 11 of his 40-odd shots have actually been on target. He just shoots on sight, which is good because you might get the odd deflected goal, you might score the odd wonder goal, but you really do want those big chances more so. If I was to give my honest opinion, and it's slightly biased because I've owned him since sort of game week 3 or 4, and I've got a lot of money tied up, I think considering there is a 0.3 difference, and you might even have money tied up in Rodgers as well, I actually marginally, and it's very close, like 1% prefer Rodgers over the next 4 or 5. Going into the busier period, though, after that, from 17, 18, 19 onwards, it might be that if Semenyo's got that yellow card out the way and his minutes continue to look good and Rodgers is getting some early subs, then maybe I do change my opinion on that. But right this second, over the next 4 weeks, I am actually very, very happy having Rodgers instead of Semenyo. I think it's so close, though. If you've just got a personal preference for one of the players, maybe you just lean that way. Let me know which out of the two you'd prefer. If you've got both of them, I actually have no issue with that. Like, if you've got, let's say you've got like PALMER, Salah, SAKA, and then your 2 players outside of that are Rodgers and Semenyo, you're absolutely sorted there as well. So you could definitely have both. But yeah, if I was looking to hold on to one, considering the price difference, and just considering some of the other stuff I've mentioned, I'd just about hold on to Rodgers. So very briefly, I thought I'd look at the best cheap defenders to buy, especially again for those of you on Wildcard, but also if you're looking to sell Trent and free up some funds, etc. I think a lot of people will be buying a cheap defender this week or next week. So I have gone through and just objectively looked at who I think are the best defenders. But what this depends most upon is your own defenders that you already have and how they rotate currently. And what I mean by that is I've got Lewis Hall actually as the first defender. Like if I was to select one defender under the price of 5 million at the moment, it'd be Lewis Hall. But if I was to buy a defender for my team this week, let's say to replace Rico Lewis, I would actually go out there and buy Van Hecke or Colwill. And the reason for that is with my current defenders that I already own, Lewis Hall doesn't rotate particularly well. What I mean by that is in the weeks that he has a really good fixture, my defenders also have good fixtures. What you want is the weeks that the defender that you're bringing in has good fixtures to be in the weeks where your other existing defenders have poor ones. So I actually think the rotation is more important than the defender that you're bringing in. So for that reason, work out your own team. When do you need the defender to have good fixtures? Just open up an Excel spreadsheet, honestly, and type stuff in. But yeah, if we're just looking objectively, Lewis Hall, he's 3rd for baseline bonus for all defenders, which means he's good for bonus points if he gets an attacking return or a clean sheet. He does have some creativity, although not as high as I think some people are suggesting, but he does take some set pieces. Newcastle are going to, I think, go on quite a nice run here. They've got the fixtures. The only thing that you could say about Lewis Hall is that he's not 100% nailed as some other defenders on this list are. So you could see one game over the busy period where he maybe doesn't start. If he drops a couple of stinkers, maybe he does drop out the 11. But we saw him playing for England. He's been looking very good. I think he'll continue to start for Newcastle. In second, I do have Ait-Nouri. Yes, he's on 4 yellows, and yes, Wolves don't keep clean sheets, but the attacking threat's so high that I still don't mind him as a buy. I do understand if you want to avoid now with the 4 yellow card situation, but The fixtures are so good until game week 18 for Wolves that if he does miss one, as long as you've got a little bit of cover, I still really like it. Maybe if your defense is looking really, really thin already, maybe it's not worth the risk. And it's probably the same for the next player then, which is Luca Dean. I just really like the fact that Villa are a good defence. The fixtures are good coming up. He's got so much attacking threat. 3 assists in a single game for France over the international break. He's a bit of a troll, but I do really like Luca Dean, and he is very cheap. And I know that Maatsen could start the odd game. I've been saying that since game week 1, but so far that's not really happened. So we have to go based on what we've seen, and what we've seen is that Luca Dean is incredibly nailed on at the moment. And until Maatsen does start getting minutes, I think we just say that Luca Dean is first choice left back. When we then move on to 4 and 5, you've got some more nailed-on players, which is Van Hecker and Colwill. They're very boring. They're very safe. They're not playing for the best defences, but also not terrible defences. But the fixtures are absolutely there. Both of them are actually okay for baseline bonus. You're not going to get much from them, but they will tick along with the odd clean sheet. And again, if they rotate well with your existing defenders, the fixtures are absolutely there. And you would expect some clean sheets for Brighton and Chelsea coming up. So I quite like those. I also really like Kirkes, maybe going slightly under the radar. Fairly cheap. Bournemouth are an okay defence. A little bit of attacking threat, but not much. Okay for bonus points. He's just like do you know what? Under 4.5 million, you could definitely do worse. I really don't mind him as a cheap defender if he rotates, especially with other defenders. I wouldn't want him as a starter every single week, but yeah, he could do a good job for you. In 7th, I've got Konsa. I made this graphic before the press conference update, so I've just put a little exclamation mark. I'm just basically saying other cheaper Villa defenders you could go for if you don't want to take the risk on Luca Dean's minutes. Obviously, don't bring in Konsa this week because he's not going to play, but in a long term, like if you've already got Konsa, for example, I'd absolutely hold on to him. And I do think the Aston Villa defence will do a lot better over the upcoming period. You would hope they'd start to keep more clean sheets. And then in 8th and 9th, I've got Anderson and Robinson. I've actually got Anderson ahead of Robinson, because when you actually look at the data, Robinson's attacking data isn't that great. His expected assist is like 0.1 per 90. And I know data doesn't tell you everything, and he is good for 90 minutes every single game. He does get up and down that left wing. He's just I don't think he doesn't deserve 3 assists this season based on the data, right? He's had a couple of really nice deliveries in there, and he will be nice value. But I just think at 4.3 million, Anderson offers a lot for you. So if I was going for an Everton, no, if I was going for a Fulham defender this week, it would be Anderson. Maybe the bigger mission here that you might be surprised by is the absence of Nottingham Forest defenders. It's just the fixtures for me. I can't suggest a Nottingham Forest defender with the fixtures that they've got coming up. I feel like you've missed the boat slightly there. Unless, again, they just somehow rotate really nicely with your existing defenders, then by all means go for it. And also Mazraoui as well. Lots of people wanting my opinion on Man United players. I'm not going to do a section on Man United because it's guesswork. I've got no idea what Amorim's going to do, what he's seen in training, but I would absolutely not be taking a risk on any United defenders this week. No one is fully nailed. I've even seen some people suggesting that Yoro could play as the central centre-back rather than the right centre-back, which would even mean someone like De Ligt could be a rotation risk. And De Ligt was the only centre-back that I've repeatedly said is probably going to be the safest one starting. Lissandro Martinez you could point to, who's at a really cheap price, but Lissandro Martinez could be benched for Luke Shaw, who could play at left centre-back, and Luke Shaw was playing at left centre-back in training recently. So, yeah. Lenny Yoro, by the way, I do think will be excellent value. He's down at like 4.3 million, I think, or something like that, but well below 4.5, and I expect him to be the right centre-back in Amorim's system, but even so, he's not fully nailed on. Dalot and Mazraoui are both fully capable of playing that right centre-back role. So, yeah, I just wouldn't take a risk on any Man United defenders. So, for me, if you're going to buy a defender this week, for some attacking threat, some fun, and the fixtures, Hall 8, Nuri, and Luca Dean, the 3 left backs. And if you're looking a little bit safer, I think Van Hecker and Cole, we could definitely do a lot worse. So just to finish up then, a Game Week 12 wildcard draft. Lots of people have been asking, and obviously because I've been ill throughout the week, I wasn't able to upload a dedicated wildcard draft video this week. So yeah, just a few minutes here on a wildcard draft. It's honestly not too dissimilar to all of the other wildcards you've seen floating around. I don't think you have to go out there and be especially different. Just having a wildcard and getting to own the players you want to own is a differential thing in and of itself. You might look at it and say, yeah, everyone's got Isak and Palmer and yeah, but not everyone does. Like Isak will feel so highly owned, but the most he's going to be owned by, even amongst engaged managers, is like 40 to 50%. So you're gaining half of his points. And João Pedro, you'll say everyone's got João Pedro. He's probably going to be at like 20%. So you're gaining 80%. And then when you start to combine all of those together, even if you've got what looks like and feels like a template team, it's not. You're still going to massively go up the ranks. So don't feel the need to be different just for the sake of it. And a lot of these players feel like they do pick themselves. So in goal, I think Fabianski offers such nice value at the moment, considering he's starting. And by the way, West Ham's fixtures coming up are quite nice. I feel like Fabianski makes sense. So I think you're choosing between Verbruggen, Sanchez and Raya. And why not go for the cheaper option when I don't think there's that much to separate them? So I would go for Verbruggen, but I have no issue with Sanchez or Raya. In defence, I've gone for Gabriel and Konate as the two more expensive defenders. And then I've got those top three that I just spoke about in the cheap defender section, which is Lewis Hall, Luke Dean, and Ait-Nouri. The reason I like this defence is every week you start Gabriel and Konate pretty much unless they've got a really bad fixture. Like you might not start Konate next week, for example, but most weeks you start them. And then you just choose based on who's got the better fixture between Hall, Luca Dean, and Ait-Nouri. And Ait-Nouri is on 4 yellows, so if he gets suspended coming up, that's absolutely fine. You've got 4 really good defenders to cover. And if Lewis Hall or Luca Dean start to lose their place, you've got, again, 4 other good defenders to cover. So I feel like you're covered here for the slight risk that you get with Lewis Hall, Luca Dean, and also Ait-Nouri for their respective reasons. So I just think it's a really solid back line. You could try and get a Gvardiol in there if you wanted to. You could go for double Arsenal defence in some regard, but I really like it. Colwill is the only other player I'd like to squeeze in. Like I probably would like a Chelsea defender. Again, you could go for Sanchez instead of Verbruggen and then get like a Van Hecker in there. But all in all, it's just a really solid defence. And it's not that expensive either as well. The midfield is really boring and really safe, but Rodgers, Mbeumo, Palmer, Salah, and Fernandes. You will notice that there's no Saka in here, but you'll also notice that I've got 2.2 million in the bank. So if you want to have Saka instead of Bruno, you can. If you wanted Saka instead of Mbeumo, you absolutely can, but you'd probably have to drop Konate in that case, which isn't an issue. Konate down to Colwill, Mbeumo up to Saka, and it's a really nice team. I've just put Mbeumo and Fernandes in here because Saka is an injury doubt. At the time of me recording, I don't know if he's fit. His next 4 fixtures aren't that great anyway, and I think there is a lot of upside with both Mbeumo and Fernandes over the next 2. They both play against Everton and then a newly promoted team over the next couple of weeks. So I just think that with Mbeumo and Fernandes, you decide in 2 weeks which one you want to move to Saka. And I think that's a nice position to be in. You could even end up holding both of them as well at their respective prices, or moving to someone like a Gordon or a Jared Bowen, who I think both have really nice fixtures coming up. So with this midfield, you're left fairly flexible, and I like having that 2.2 million in the bank. You don't have to spend all of your money. And again, if you want to, then feel free to go and do that. But I just don't see any positions here that I'd massively want to spend that money on. And then the front line is the really, really boring João Pedro, Isak, and Cunha, because they're all offering such great value. If I were to drop one of the 3, it would be Cunha. I did actually look at, with the money in the bank, you could just do Jackson instead of Cunha. So you could have a front 3 of João Pedro, Isak, and Jackson, but then when you want to bring Saka in, it's 2 transfers to do so. I don't mind that, though. I do think that Jackson and probably has higher upside than Cunha over the next sort of 4 or 5 game weeks. So yeah, that would be what I'd do on a wild card. Again, don't feel the need to go massively different, but also, if you just don't fancy Isak and you want to go Jackson, go there. If you just think that, I don't know, Erdegaard's going to be a great shout, go for him. Like, there are different ways that you can play this game. Like, some people will be like, I want to hang on to Chris Wood. By all means, go for it. There's no issue there. I want to go for Welbeck instead of João Pedro. Could be a really nice differential. There are various players you can consider, but I think for the most part, just make sure that you've got Salah, Palmer. I would have Isak and João Pedro. I would have Gabriel, and then outside of that, I don't think anyone's locked in for me in terms of like players you must have. So Isak, Salah, Palmer, João Pedro, Gabriel. That is it, honestly. Those 5 players are the only ones that I would really mention. And probably one of them, Mbeumo and Fernandes. Outside of that, be creative, have fun with it. And let me know what your wildcard draft is down below in the comments. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 12 deadline decisions video. Thank you again for your patience this week whilst I've been ill, but there have been 2 uploads today, so hopefully you've enjoyed both of those. And if you've not watched my team selection video that I uploaded earlier today, please check that out. And also there is a link down below in the description to Fantasy Football Hub. They're currently offering a 30-day free trial. So if you want to go and tinker with your team and get access to some of the stats that I use in these videos, check that out with the link down below in the description. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.